Hello everyone, and welcome back to another battle guide video for Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires, where today we will be covering Nurgle and specifically Gath Plague Father. Now, I know many of you who have played the game will basically understand how his units will operate 90% of the time, but I still wanted to cover Gath and explain why the certain strategy makes him extremely powerful. Now, the typical formation, as you kind of look here on the screen, that makes him so strong is the basic Blob. Now, blobbing can be very useful when you have abilities that do better when affecting like more than one unit at a time, such as like a Mortis engine or an area of effect buff or debuffs against the enemy. And now I know this kind of gets repetitive, however, I want to go over why it is very important for Nurgle and their units to be so close together, because even though it's a lot of the same thing over and over, the main point of any battle is to win and win effectively, and this is what this formation allows them to do, like 98.888 repeating, so on and so forth. But I do obviously need to point out that this tactic will not always be suitable for every situation, such as going up against lots of missile units or lots of magic potential, such as factions with Sinch and Kairos, or the high elves, the dark elves, and Kislev. But I mean, you'll be able to kind of determine that depending on the enemy you're actually going up against. So you'll know ahead of time, what you're basically going to deal with. Is it going to be melee? Is it going to be missiles? That kind of thing. So just be on the lookout for that, and do know that this formation will not work every time, but most of the time you will definitely be okay using this tactic. And regardless, there are definitely ways to work around those kind of units like missiles and magic and that kind of thing, that I will go over later on in the video. And I will also have a link in the description of this video to my Gath skill point guide video that I did a little over a year ago when Warhammer 3 initially released, where in that video I do have a battle of from an actual campaign that I did when Warhammer 3 first came out, showing you just how effective that the blobbing tactic can be once everything is kind of paired together. And just briefly before I get into the main parts of the video, I just want to remind everyone to check out the racial mechanics and faction effects and legendary lord effects that you will be using in a campaign. I won't say it in every video moving forward, but since it's only the second one, I thought I would briefly mention it again, because especially for newer players, it will definitely help you kind of determine who you want to play as, but also to kind of know what you're going to get yourself into once you begin a campaign. But without further ado, let's jump into the main parts of the video. Now, I personally believe that Nurgle's units are highly undervalued in terms of their military prowess in Warhammer 3, because in order to use their armies effectively, you really need to be able to use every single unit together and use it effectively, because you won't have like huge heavy hitters like one hero or lord doing a bunch of spell casting, doing a bunch of damage, or a single unit doing a bunch of damage. Because really what Nurgle excels at is slowly but surely killing your enemies over time, and they do that very effectively. And they're able to do this for several reasons. Now, one of these reasons are the passive abilities that some units possess. For example, let's look at the Cloud of Flies ability here, that all demonic units of Nurgle will have this ability, which provides, as you can see here, a +9 melee defense once they're in melee. Now, it says there is a cooldown, but the duration is infinite, so as long as they're engaged in melee, they will almost always have this ability. It's a huge bonus to them, jumping from 24 to 33 melee defense as well, which I know it's Nurglings and it's not a high stat anyway, but we'll get into other things down the road that make them more powerful. Because also demon units also have a 20% physical resistance base. They just always have that. So more melee defense plus the physical resistance just makes them really tanky right from the get-go. Excuse me. And kind of touching with their base stats. Now, even though their base stats don't seem like much, they will receive that +9 melee defense as long as they stay in melee. And also, another passive that they get, whether they're demonic or not, is the poison attack, which also reduces if I hover over it here, it should be able to tell me. There we go. Poison, -15%. I keep moving it there. Missile, sorry, it keeps going over it, but Basically poison does a negative 15% armor and base weapon damage, as well as missile damage, and also decreases the enemy's speed. So again, even though these base stats aren't that great, you know, the abilities that they have so far already, by just with the poison ability there and the cloud of flies plus the physical resistance, automatically makes their enemies weaker and makes them a little stronger right away from the get-go. So the balance of the battle shifts pretty drastically early on. Furthermore, in terms of like units and lords and their stats, typically in the game, Nurgle's units, lords and heroes have a much larger hit point base than other units in the game, which Gath, for example, can get up to like 20,000 hit points later on in the campaign. If you get like the Gore Drench trait, as well as the hit points in his skill tree, he can just become a massive hit point blob. Now, everything that we've already talked about with the hit points, the 20% physical resistance, the extra melee buff, just makes them very tanky and durable, which allows them to, again, slowly and degrade and kill enemies over time, because that will be the way you end up killing a lot of the enemies when playing as Gath. It's just the gradual grind, and you'll see, especially if you go and check out that skill point guide video in that battle, the enemy's hit points just drastically just plummet, because they're just not taking much damage. They're doing a bunch of like debuffs against the enemy. It's really just really fun to watch. Now moving on to what you can expect from your lords and heroes, you'll see that many of the boosts for your units and debuffing your enemy units kind of come into play when using your lords and heroes. For example, if we check out Gath and his little abilities he has here, he also has the Cloud of Flies ability, but he also has, if you're using Nurgling units, he provides regeneration to them. He has the Slime Trail that provides a -5 melee attack and -10% speed within a certain effect range. And then he also is a Mortis Engine in melee, down his melee line if you go that route. So again, it's another really effective tool when you're fighting in a blob, because if we zoom out here a little bit, that little first blue ring there shows the area that this Pestilent Decay ability will be applied to. So fighting in this tight little blob here gets more units in that area, which means that ability is affecting more units within that radius. And he also has the Plaguefather's Oration ability here, which again, with that little ring, provides a melee defense plus 24 in leadership. So all your units, you know, with the +9 melee defense, plus for every like 90 seconds, you'll have plus 24 melee defense as well, boosting their melee defense even further. So it just makes them, again, even harder to kill, makes them super tanky. Also provides, you know, 16 leadership, which if we look at the Cultists of Nurgle, once they get on a War Shrine, if we zoom in here, you can see the War Shrine here, gives them even more regeneration, gives them regeneration, here we go, the Giver of Abundant Glory, gives them even more regeneration, gives them more leadership in that area of effect. So basically, Nurgle does a really good job of making sure their units don't break, and they heal, and they also get loads and loads of melee defense. So it's really good. Now we've gone over the Cultist hero, but another hero that does really well for you is the Plague Riddens. Now I usually get one Nurgle Plague Ridden hero as well as one Plague Ridden of Death, because the Plague Ridden will be able to kind of do your damage dealing in terms of spells, whether it's Stream of Corruption, Blight Boil, but it'll also be able to use Fleshy Abundance to heal your units as well, which they also can have an ability that also provides more melee attack within a area of effect as well, and more armor piercing damage, which again makes your units even stronger. And again, like with Nurgle, you can't look at their stats and be like, oh, this faction is complete garbage, because they don't really get their military prowess and strength from just their basic stats, but it's all the other things that you can apply, which is why, you know, utilizing your entire army is so critical to the success of your armies when playing as a Nurgle based faction, because you need a little bit of everything to not only make your units stronger but make your units weaker. If we click on the Plague Plague-Ridden of Death here. A lot of times the spells I'll end up using is Soul Blight, which makes the enemy armor piercing and base weapon damage decreased even further by negative 25%. You add that to the negative 15% that they get from poison. So immediately, just by being in melee and popping down that spell, the enemy will have a negative 40% weapon strength, which is a huge debuff. Also the negative 30 armor, which will help, especially if you're using Nurgling units, but in general, Nurgle units don't have a lot of armor piercing, so it bypasses the armor some enemies you face may have, which basically just makes sure that their weapon strength actually lands. Like when they do land an attack, that the weapon strength is actually doing a good amount of damage to the enemy there. So again, just a little brief recap. For your lords and heroes, they do a really good job of just buffing and debuffing the enemy, making your units stronger. But after all of that, going over the units, going over the lords and heroes, and all the abilities that you can do there, now we're going to talk about dealing with missiles and magic. Now I know it can be very kind of frustrating going up against these kind of units, because really those magic and missiles, especially going up against Kairos that do flame damage as well, they're kind of set up to annihilate your units. And I again know this can be kind of troublesome, but don't worry, because there are definitely ways to work around this. For example, one way you can do it, I know I'm not set up in the trees right now like I could be, but it's just so you could see the units here during the video. But one thing you can do when you're able to is to fight in trees. Now that won't block every spell, that won't block all the missile damage that you will face, but it definitely will block quite a bit of it. Especially since, you know, Nurglings have no armor, Gath being a super large entity himself, the War Shrine being a super large entity himself, it'll just help kind of negate some of that missile damage. And it'll also make fighting against larger enemies easier, because they face a negative 80% I think it's weapon strength and melee attack debuff, which it won't like show it on the actual stats. But yeah, or sorry, not negative weapon strength, negative 80% speed and negative 80% weapon or melee attack, excuse me, for large units. So this will be really useful when you're going up against ogres, for example. The ogre units will basically just become useless because of all of the buffs you're providing your own units, the debuffs you're providing against the enemy, and fighting in the trees. The ogres will literally just become mush when fighting against you. Another tool at your disposal on the campaign map that will help you when fighting against these kind of factions is using heroes to scout. It really becomes very critical in your campaigns, especially when you end up going up against siege factions or just high elves. Basically anything that prioritizes melee, or sorry, missiles or magic. Definitely take a few turns of not having a hero in your army when they're probably like moving in ambush stance anyway, so you don't get attacked just straight up, and use them to scout. When going up against these factions, you got to think of kind of like a Skaven. You need to be stealthy, you need to be careful, because you as the player, even though playing as Gath, you can instantly recruit units. You really want to be keeping, like, it is very critical for them to take minimal damage in every fight, because when they take loads of damage, it hurts them more, because you can't just easily rely on one lord again or one hero to do all the damage dealing for the next fight. You need every unit at your disposal at max health as much as possible there. And you know, just briefly, just be comfortable with losing out on a few turns of your hero in the army, because again, you never know when scouting an enemy will help you set up for a perfect ambush, because that will come in very important situations. Words are hard today, apparently. If you're able to see what the enemy's doing, where they're coming from, and allow you to set up that good ambush there. And now where it comes to battles that don't have trees, or trees just aren't an option, or the enemy is just bringing like so many reinforcements, or just has so much magic potential or so much missile potential, it is a good idea at times to bring more varied units into your roster. For example, Soul Grinders, Chaos Knights, Warhounds, Furies, and even Rotflies can be really useful in disrupting an enemy's missile units. It can also be really useful in like sniping If you have Rottweilers or Soul Grinders, you know, big blobs of infantry or missiles, or even like single entity flying units like Kairos himself and whatnot. I don't really recommend the Toad units or like the Plague Riders because they're a fairly large unit and they're really slow for a flanking unit. You'll see like Nurgle units are just very like dwarfish like type of speed. So even though the Toads are supposed to be your flanking infantry, if your missile units aren't, or the enemy missile units aren't like already in melee or already distracted by something else, those units are just going to be shot to death before they even get to the enemy. So even though they're supposed to be quote unquote a flanking unit, I just have rarely had success being able to actually utilize them in doing so because they just get shot before they even get there. Because again, every Nurgle unit is not going to have a lot of armor, and even though they have a lot of hit points, basic missile units are going to absolutely obliterate your units if you don't do something to negate them. So again, Chaos Knights, Soul Grinders, even Warhounds or Chaos Furies are just really good at disrupting enemy missile units. Even though they may not win in melee, at least it distracts them for a little bit while you're able to take out the other units in a enemy army, and basically lets you play catch up once you get to them. But anyway, that is all I have for you guys when it comes to Gath and his units. Now don't forget to check out the skill point guide I have made for Gath, again, where I show an actual battle of me utilizing all of this stuff. It'll really, I know, you know, not having other units in this custom battle here kind of is hard to show what I mean, but it'll, that skill guide video in that battle will really show how you're able to utilize your heroes, your lords, and your units really effectively together when you're going up against a lot of battles that the auto resolve will show you like a valiant defeat or close defeat, but then once you get into the fight, you just slowly but surely see that bar turn green instead of red. And again, thank you for the support. That link for that video will be in the description of this video, and don't forget to hit that like button and comment down below if you have anything specific in terms of recommendations for videos or guides that you would like me to cover next, or that things you'd just like me to cover in general. But thank you again, guys, for your support, and don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, and I will see you guys again on the next video or battle guide video or live stream. Hope to see you there as well. But thanks you guys again, and I will see you soon. Bye.